Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio's Writers and Authors Show. We air this show every second Wednesday with our friends over at Books Forward. I encourage you to go to their website, booksforward.com. And today we're excited to welcome thriller and crime writer Mark Ellis. He's over in England, and he is joining us to talk about his latest novel in his World War II series. It's called Dead in the Water. It features DCI Frank Merlin, we love that name, by the way, who continues his battle against rampant wartime crime when a mangled body is found in the Thames, just as some items of priceless art go mysteriously missing. So we love the whole, art crime is always fascinating to me. It is out now on Kindle and audiobooks. I encourage you to go to his website, markellisauthor.com, but it will be out in print edition on April 25th, 2023. But again, you can get it now. So welcome to the show, Mark. How are you?
Thank you very much, and wonderful to meet you. And thank you very much both for having me on the show.
Oh, we love this. So
yes,
you were
cool.
A barrister. I just wanted to say the word barrister.
Yeah, barrister.
You don't get to say that often over here. So what led you going from barrister to author, or were you always writing? There's something about.
Well, up until now, I've had a checkered career. You're correct indeed. I studied law at Cambridge University, and then I became a barrister for a while, but I didn't really take to it. And so I joined what in those days was called a merchant bank. I think that name's gone away now, but I became a banker. After a few years of doing that, one of my clients offered me a job, a large corporate client, in terms of made mergers and acquisitions. So I joined that company and was there for several years, during some of which I actually lived in America. I lived in New York for 2 or 3 years at the end of the 80s, and I really enjoyed that. But then in the 90s, I decided with a partner, a close friend and my business partner, to set up our own computer services company, which we did. Oh. And we had, as inevitably you do, lots of ups and downs. But eventually, we although it was based in Europe, we took it public on NASDAQ. And that entailed also coming back and forth to America quite a bit. And I spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, where we had some business partners. In the end, a company called NCR, National Cash Register, which is a venerable old American company, offered to buy us, and we said thank you very much. So we sort of bought ourselves a little space in terms of time or being able to do things. And I always wanted to be a writer from a very young age, and I had written at university and so on. But once I got working full time, I tried just for a few months the thing of getting up at 6:30 in the morning and doing a few words and then doing it late at night when you get back, but I couldn't sustain it. But I said to myself, one day I would like to be a writer. So when I sold the company, it appeared clear to me this was my chance. I either try now or I'll never do it. And so I knuckled down and created Frank Merlin.
Awesome.
Cool.
Awesome.
I
And
like
so
that.
Frank, and I like when you say you have a checkered past. I'm like, ooh, intrigued.
Ooh, what does that mean?
He does write about crime. I like that.
I'll
Frank,
turn that into a novel one day.
oh, good,
Yeah.
good.
There's enough material, I can tell you.
I think you're
Cool.
the first author who said I have a checkered past. I'm like, woo.
Mm.
We did interview a member of the mafia once, so that was kind of
did he?
cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
He was not that checkered.
Yeah.
No, he was adopted into the mafia, so he wasn't pure mafia. But then I said,
Right.
well, what do you do now? He goes, I'm in the trucking business. I'm like, oh, I'm sure you are.
Oh, yeah, sure you are.
I think he's still friends with me on LinkedIn. I don't know if I want to look. But he did blow the cover of what was happening with Whitey Bulger. And when Whitey Bulger
really?
got
Really?
arrested,
Yes.
oh, yeah. It was like 2 days later, they got him in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
sitting there going, we just did a thing because he was part of it was a Boston Hill
The
gang.
Boston gang. I saw the film, wasn't it?
Yes.
Johnny Depp,
Boston
wasn't
Hill.
it? Was it Johnny
Probably.
Depp? Or, yeah.
Don't start me on that.
Busy boy.
But Franklin Merlin, tell us a little bit about him. Nancy's been reading it, and I've started reading Dead in the Water. Tell us a little bit about him. And Merlin is like a hero to us. Anyway, we love
Yeah,
is he a
sure. No,
wizard?
well, the name. I'll tell you how the name came about. I originally, when I started the first book, which became Prince's Gate, which, just to confuse everyone, now the publishers have decided to rename my first three books. So Prince's Gate is now The Embassy Murders. Well, they're for logical reasons, in the sense that if you see a book standing there called Prince's Gate, which happens to be an area in London, you don't necessarily know it's a murder story. So they wanted to make clear it's a murder story, and the same with the other two books in the series. But anyway, he was your standard Cockney policeman called Harry. I can't actually remember what the first name now. It was Harry something. And I decided, this is a bit boring. And I went on holiday to Spain. This is a really obscure way of coming up with the title. I happened to be sitting by a field, and in the field there were some sheep. And I asked someone, what breed are those sheep? And I'm still not quite sure if this is correct, but he said they're merino sheep. I said, oh, merino, okay. And so when I came back home, I thought, why don't I make Frank Merlin half Spanish? I mean, he's English, but like he would have a Spanish parent. So then I came up with a whole backstory where his father, who was called Javier Merino, was a merchant seaman from Cadiz, not from Cadiz, what am I saying? Corunna in northern Spain. He ended up in London, fell in love with an English Cockney girl, and they set up, or they took over the girl's father's chandlery shop. Is chandlery an American word? You understand? It's ship goods. Chandlery. It's quite an old word.
We would probably
Yeah.
say chandlery.
A merchant.
Okay. All
Or,
right.
Yeah.
merchant.
Anyway, that's completely irrelevant to this. Apart from it's part of the backstory.
okay.
It's part of the backstory. And then Javier Merino goes on to have several children. The first and oldest of whom is Francisco Merino. And then a few years in, when the father gets fed up with English people mispronouncing his name, he decides to change himself to Harry Merlin, and Francisco Merino becomes Frank Merlin. That's how he becomes Frank Merlin.
And that is always what happens in family history when you're trying to do genealogy. You're like, dude, why did you do that? Detour.
But he's Spanish in look. He's tall, dark, and handsome. But he's born and brought up in London, so he's very English. But every so often, his being Spanish gives him the right to swear in Spanish, which he occasionally.
Oh, we like this.
Yes.
Well,
so that's
Nancy
Sorry,
starts
go ahead.
reading your book and she's going, "Oh, this is funny. This is really funny." What she was just going, "This is like a good romp." So it seems that he's got quite a good character.
Yeah, I won't divulge his personal history because his personal history evolves through the books, and I think it's a spoiler to go into too much detail. But he's a solid individual, with a good heart. He's not one of those policemen who's got a chip on his shoulder or whatever. He does have an irritating superior, the assistant commissioner, who he often has battles with. But fundamentally, he's a good, solid guy. He played sport when he was younger. He was a very good footballer. Football, as in the English sense of soccer, and he has good friends. He likes a good drink. He's very keen on poetry. He loves poetry. He can quote reams of poetry at anyone who he wants to quote it to. And he has a good friend who they go out and they go to the pub and they talk poetry a lot. So that's Frank Merlin. He has. Naturally, he has. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. He has his team of sidekicks. He has a Sergeant Bridges, who's a burly, sort of solid guy. He has a lady constable, which was, of course, extremely unusual in the wartime, but it did happen. And she probably got a job. Well, she did get a job partly because she's the niece of the assistant commissioner, but she's a very nice, bright girl. And then there are various constables and other inspectors who appear. Some appear more in one book than they do in another, and so on. But the reason the main drive for the series was, so I decided I wanted to write books. I then had to decide what books. I said I'd like to write crime fiction because that's a very popular genre. And I think, who knows, you might actually make some money out of it. And then I decided I would like to pick a period, and I considered a variety of different historical periods, but I plumped for World War II, partly for personal reasons, because so my parents lived through the war. My father was actually in the Navy in the war, and although he didn't die in the war years, he did die because of the war. He contracted a disease in Africa, which was a wasting disease. He didn't die till 1960 when I was 7. But so basically he died because of the war. So that the war loomed large in my background. And also my mother used to tell me funny stories about her wartime experiences. She had been a secretary in Wales. I'm Welsh originally, and she'd been a secretary in Wales. And if you worked for the railway in those days, still actually to a certain extent, you get quite a few perks like free tickets. And she and her friends would use free tickets to go up to London over the weekend during the war. And they also they could stay in a hotel very cheaply because they were employed by the railway company. And this was like 1942, 3, 4. I said, well, you were going up for a weekend when London was being bombed. Didn't you sort of consider that was a bit dangerous? And she said, well, we had to continue living our lives. And that sort of opened a window to me on life in the war. Life did not stop. Ordinary life did not stop. There were constraints, there was rationing, there was shortages, there were bombs, but people tried to live their ordinary lives. People fell in love, got married, got divorced, etc., etc. And of course, criminals continued to commit crime. And not only did they continue to commit crime, but crime between 1939 and 1945 in England and Wales grew by 60%. And this, therefore, I thought, if I'm writing a crime series, this represents a lot of opportunity. And there were a number of reasons why. I mean, I think a lot of people think, when they think of the war in the British context and in American context too, it's like the stiff upper lip and people just knuckled down and did their best for the war effort. But the criminals must have done the same, but they didn't. They thought they saw opportunity. First of all, you had the blackouts, and everything was, there were no lights in the evening. Then there was rationing, huge amounts of rationing, which created a huge black market. So there were all sorts of scams people could do. Then over the years, and particularly after the foreign forces began to come in, Americans, Australians, and whatever, there was a huge market for vice, particularly in London. There were lots of clubs and prostitutes. And strange enough, these were run by a Maltese gang. I don't know why, but everything was controlled by people from Malta. They had so many prostitutes on the streets of London. They used to call them the Piccadilly paratroopers. And and that raises another issue. I mentioned the gangs. There were lots of gangs. There was gang warfare. There were gangs who controlled the black market, gangs who did more vice, gangs that did more robbery, and all of these things. If you throw them together, there was a thriving criminal life. In fact, there was one criminal who lived through the war. He was a real person called Mad Frankie Fraser. He's dead now, but like 10, 15 years ago, he had some notoriety. He had no notoriety anyway, but he had more notoriety because someone ghosted his autobiography. And in the story, and then when he was in the talk shows talking about it, one of the things he said, and I won't use any profanities, but they were filled with profanities. He said, that X, Hitler, why did he X give in? We were having such an XX wonderful time, i.e. the criminal.
No.
So,
No,
yeah.
no way. No, it kind of reminds me of Prohibition over here when the mafia went,
Exactly.
It was running. But Nancy, you were talking about Nana.
Yeah,
World
my
War II.
grandmother came from Hull in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
But she was over here in the States during the war. And she said it was a free-for-all. And she still had relatives back in England. And she said that basically you could get anything you want if you were smart enough and fast enough. It's how she put it. She's kind of like people were auctioning off things and bargaining. And that's where, in her mind, that's where bargaining really, really took off.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
she was like, for food, she would go bargain for food.
Sure. Yeah.
And
obviously, if you had money or you you didn't have to necessarily bargain with money. There were coupons for petrol, there were coupons for clothing.
I was going to say, watch what you say about my Nana, Mark.
Yeah.
And
Spitfire she was.
People forged these coupons. There was a huge amount of forgery.
Yeah.
And all sorts of other scams, like people who are of military age would go to corrupt doctors who would give them medical certificates for a sum of money, saying that they were not fit to serve. There were people who were building, obviously lots of bomb shelters were built, and deals were done where between corrupt council officials and builders, where they
What are you talking about now?
Sorry, okay, now too. They built shoddy shelters which collapsed when they were bombed, and people got killed because they'd cut corners to make money, and they'd taken a large slice out of the council money. These are real cases which led to prosecutions.
Well, it's interesting, when you talk about, also in this book, you focus on missing art. And, I look at, we think about music and the arts have always really told the true story of history, I think. Just, what people felt, what was really going down versus what would come out of a politician's mouth, really. Yeah. Right? Sorry, I have to throw that in there. But missing art, when you think about, you're going through a world war, all of this is going on. Are people looking at art at that point? And is it, your focus is in a different place. So when there's it's like criminals will set a fire on one side of the town, so everybody rushes there so they can go rob everybody while the fire's going. No,
but the fact is that the art market continued throughout the war.
Really?
It wasn't easy to conduct, but that's what part of this story is about. So the book starts off with, it's pre-war, and it starts off with a Nazi raid on a wealthy Jewish family in Vienna who have a lot of art, and the Nazis steal the art. And the Nazis were being sent out with instructions by people like Goering, who was a huge art collector, to look out for interesting pieces. This is from before the war, when there was the Anschluss with Austria, when they were rolling into Czechoslovakia and so on. And this continued throughout the war. And of course, there are cases still today where there are families trying to recover their art that went missing through this route. But I sort of, this is what I've created is fiction, but it's based on things that happened. So I have a story where the art is stolen, and then some of it reappears in London, having gone through some torturous route of having been sold by a Nazi to someone else, and it ends up in the hands of a businessman in London, and he wants to sell them. And so he goes to an art dealer in London, and the art dealer knows of people who are interested. And one of the people who would have been interested, and this is a real person who appears in the book, is someone called Calouste Gulbenkian. And I had read a biography about him a few years before, and no one knows his name now, but he was actually the richest man in the world in 1942, which is the year of this book, richer even than Rockefeller, because he's the man who was known as Mr. 5%. He introduced all the major, in the beginning of the 20th century, so we're talking 1910, 1912, he was the first person to introduce all the major oil companies to the Middle East. And he was right there at the ground level for the development of the oil industry. And he's known as Mr. 5% because he always had his 5%. And I thought to myself, at this point in the war, he had lived in London, he'd gone to live in France, he'd had to run from he didn't run, but he extricated himself and went to Vichy, France, but he ended up in Portugal. Lisbon, of course, was a neutral, Portugal was neutral, so it was an interesting place for anyone to live or for an author to write about. But I just posit that, or suggest that, the art that's turned up in London, the art dealer can notify him, and he's interested in buying it, but he has complications in buying it because he can't get hold of his money because various places, it's in all various places where you can't access it. And then this leads to one strong element of the story.
Oh, no spoilers allowed, Nancy.
No spoilers.
Yeah, I'm not. No, I'm not going to do that. But it is interesting. I just reflect on what my grandmother told me, and I remember her talking about getting carpets and how hard it was to get real carpets, good carpets, how much you had to pay. And she said you offloaded the carpet at night because if your neighbors saw it, they would come sort of help
Yes,
themselves. Yeah.
I'm sure.
So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
And there was what
Funny.
was also going on a lot was the soldiers and criminals, or soldiers without the criminals, were stealing stuff from the army camps, you know, and on an
Wow.
industrial scale, not just guns and bullets, but I was reading the other day about there was a huge amount of laundry that went missing because, you know, it had a
Wow.
value, and so they took it and they
Yeah.
sold it, and they made money. And it wasn't only crooked soldiers like at the lower level. There were colonels and majors they found to be involved in this, who some of them got caught, some of them
Wow.
didn't get caught. So corruption
Wow.
was quite significant, which you never.
Mhm.
Before I launched into this whole thing, I never thought that. But
Wow.
Yeah.
anyway, so as I
Wow.
say, every book I do, when I'm doing my research for each book, I find some new quirky little odd thing that I would never have thought would have happened or be the case. So
Mm.
it's
Wow.
astonishing. I've written, and you know, there are 5 books in the series so far, so there's quite a
Cool.
lot of research that's gone in.
Mm.
But
Do you travel to any of the destinations that you write
I
about?
have, I have. First of all, most of it is in London, so I could walk around London. But I do make a point of double checking my descriptions, you know, and making sure that's what it would have been like during the war. If it's changed, getting old pictures and so on. But I have had other capital cities or countries, but they're all quite minor. But I have, to answer your question, I have visited some of them. So my second book, which was called Stalin's Goal, but has now been renamed In the Shadows of the Blitz. In that one, we have Stalin and Beria and lots of unsavory Russians appear. And I decided, and also there's a Polish angle. So there's scenes in Warsaw. So I did go to Warsaw and Moscow. This was quite a long time ago now. It obviously would be difficult to go to Moscow now. But
Right.
yes, I do that. And I have other places. I have New York features a little bit in one of the books,
cool.
but I lived in New York. I know New York pretty well. Buenos Aires appears. I didn't go there specifically for the book, but I had spent a bit of time there, so I knew it on the ground. So yes, not always, but sometimes I do. But certainly any London location, I go and double check.
In regards to this book, Dead in the Water, and it having this art mystery in it and art thievery, when you were doing your research on that, especially you've written about Stalin, right?
Yeah.
I have in the back of my head, there was some big art scandal to do with Russian paintings. I don't know if it was around the World War II era. There was something happened somewhere, and
I think you might be thinking of, and I can't remember. There was a palace, which
yes.
that's what I think, and it incredibly wealthy, jeweled, other stuff, jade or something like that. I can't remember. It wasn't jade, which got transported completely somewhere. And I think, and recently they started that. There's a suggestion they found it, you know, 200 feet underground somewhere. I can't remember the specifics.
There is something,
yeah.
there's something, but these art mysteries happen all the time. It happened in Silver City, New Mexico, in Southwest New Mexico is a place we go to as often as we can. It's a blossoming art community. And one of the galleries / also selling antiques and all of this, turns out one of the paintings they've had up for sale was this masterpiece stolen painting. I wish I had the name of it right now and the artist. And it became, and there's actually a whole documentary on this whole thievery of this painting.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we think about the value of art, which is, it's like the value of wine, right? How do you price it? How, you know, so then here comes the thieveries of it. You know, I find art thievery fascinating.
I think there was a Hollywood film, not about quite recently, 5 or 6 years ago, with George Clooney called The Monument Men. Because there was like a division of the army involving British and American officers, which was sent out to try and track down art that the Nazis had stolen. I never saw it, but I would quite like to see it now because I know a bit more about the subject.
Some of the art was painted over.
Yeah.
When the thieves stole it, they would paint something on top of the painting so that people wouldn't know what was what
Yeah.
the real painting was.
Yeah.
Which, kind of ruins the painting unless you really know how to restore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Wow.
I mean, and so I think there's probably a lot of paintings still out there.
Yeah,
Or floating in the
absolutely
water.
sure there are probably hundreds, maybe thousands. You just
Mhm.
don't know. But I have to say that that's not the sole plot in this book, the art theft, because and there are a few other subplots. But I also have a story, and it sort of runs into it. But all my stories tend to run into each other. There's usually a way they finish up satisfactorily, I hope. And one of the other things I do, so when I research a book, obviously I have a lot of general knowledge now about the World War II, but I know it's going to happen in a specific month or 5 or 6 weeks. So before I start, I spend 3 months researching that specific period. And so this period of the Dead in the Water is the summer of 1942. And I learned something new when I was doing the research, which was, of course, by now the American soldiers who arrived, Pearl Harbor's happened 6 months before, Americans are in the war, and people are arriving. And but I did not know that in August of 1942, the British government legislated to cede jurisdiction over, the American authorities would have legal jurisdiction over all alleged crimes committed by their people. So if someone was accused of murder, it would all be handled by American criminal courts, or lesser stuff, theft or whatever. And so there was a cutoff point in the time of this book where the people might have been, and in fact, this is the case here. Frank Merlin is investigating something which involves an airman, and he has to hand the case over. And there's quite a plot. There's a plot about the fact he doesn't want to do it. He believes the Americans are getting it wrong, etc., which is then further extended the plot for the fact that the airman is a black airman, and of course there was a huge amount of prejudice between white and black soldiers in Britain, and so then yes, and and also so in the legal system, the prejudice came out insofar as there were more black soldiers prosecuted and hung than white soldiers, etc.
Wow.
So there's an angle of that where someone is accused, and but I won't go into any more. And that's
it's kind of like what happens over here. I mean, it's like if you're a black man, you're going to get pulled over and your car raided versus a white man. And
it sort of made itself very clear in Britain, because if soldiers were going to a dance hall in London, for example, or anywhere in England, some white soldiers would take offense at the idea they would see a black soldier dancing with an English white girl, and they wouldn't like it, and a fight would start, and and the same in pubs. And in due course, by the latter years of the war, many places of entertainment, pubs and whatever, operated as sort of apartheid, in the sense that they agreed. One pub would say, we'll take the black soldiers, and another pub would say, we'll take the white soldiers, just to avoid any hassle.
That's like what we lived in South Africa, and it was like that. It was also like that for white women. It was also the same for white women. Like you couldn't go, there were men's pubs and you couldn't go in, and if you're a woman, so but it was mostly black versus white. But it's like here, you go around the corner and the shops were split into, like, this is the black side of the shop, that's the white side. And I'm like, I want to go on the black side because it looks more fun. Because it did. Well, because it made no sense to me as a kid, that apartheid stuff. I heard that for soldiers, black soldiers, even like here, the Tuskegee Airmen, there's some famous stories when they went over to France, that they were more accepted in France than when they came home. Like in France, they were appreciated and honored, and then they'd fly home and have to face the prejudice again. So
a lot of famous jazz players, didn't they? They just who were in these services. They went to Paris after the war, and they stayed there forever. Anyway, that's part of the story.
You've got so much going on, man. This is so much fun.
There's a lot going on.
It was a busy time, and I think my grandmother was right. It was busy, and it was a free for all. It was a little bit crazy.
Yeah,
and think of the music too that was coming out at the time too. So it was kind of like party time, even though we're blowing people up.
Yeah, there was some good dance music in those days. Yeah, absolutely.
That's all some of
Yeah.
the and the melody,
Glenn Miller,
melodies.
Glenn Miller, and
Oh
others.
yeah,
Yeah.
Tommy
Andrew
Dorsey,
sisters.
Duke
But
Ellington.
that reminds me of another interesting thing again, which is surprising, which is not related to this book, but is related to earlier books. When I was writing about periods when the Blitz happened, people have the idea that and lots of buildings were blown to pieces and whatever. No one thinks that there was looting. There was huge amounts of looting by ordinary people, by policemen, by air wardens. If people were going past the house and they saw there was some nice stuff there, they'd go and grab it. And I think, if I'm right, in the 3 months between October, November, December of 1940, which is the Blitz, the main Blitz, there were 4,500 cases in the Old Bailey, which is our famous old court in London, where people were prosecuted for looting. And the worst one to me, or the most striking, is there's a famous restaurant here still going called the Café Royal, and it was a place where you go to dance, dine, etc. And it was hit directly, so hundreds of people were killed. And when the services arrived, the fire services and the wardens, whatever, to try and sort everything out, they had to fight their way to the bodies against people who were trying to pull the jewelry off. So.
Oh
so
my
I
gosh.
think,
Well,
I
with
think
desperate times, and
if
people.
someone made a film of that, I don't think people would believe it. But, anyway,
Well,
so
that we've seen a few things just in travels around the world, and desperate things create opportunity, and that's really the truth of this. What about also when you talk about crime, all the spying that was going on, the espionage and spying, and I think that's a whole other war crime. We did an interview about the doll woman spy. Turned out to be the biggest woman spy in this country during World War II. She had a doll shop in New York, and here's this sweet little lady with her dolls who hung out with all the Japanese and gave all this information through her dolls and doll sales to the Japanese. The doll woman's a Velveteen.
And why?
And so, but she got caught. But I mean, she went down, like she was giving out information that was ending on submarines. I mean, it was insane what this woman did.
Yeah.
And she basically, I mean, people died over her things, her spying. And you sit there going, oh, cool, we got a female spy, of course, like Tokyo Rose and all of that. There's that, what she was up to with propaganda.
Julia Childs.
Well, she was a positive spy. Julia Childs was a positive spy. We like her.
Oh, the cook.
Yes. She was a spy
She's a spy?
in World War II. Yep. For isn't it cool though? Like all these women out there going, hello, I'll make you some food while I'm looking at you.
There's another one. There's an author here called Ben McIntyre, who's very good writing biographies of this period. I can't remember the name of the book, but there was a German lady spy who became a communist in the 1920s. And she became a spy in the 1920s, and she was spying for Russia. She was in China and Japan, all sorts of places. She ended up in the war, married to an English. She was. I don't know whether she was actually married or not. They were married to an English worker living in Oxfordshire, quite close to a place where I spent a bit of time. And she was the main one responsible for. There was a guy called Klaus Fuchs, who was a scientist in the atomic bomb and all that stuff. She was the main passer of information of the atomic bomb from the British side to the Russians. And she is calculated on our side to be the most damaging spy there's ever been.
Wow, we need to do a show just on spies. I mean,
I do have quite a lot of espionage. There's a bit of espionage in this book too. And my third book, which used to be called Merlin at War, is now called The French Spy. And it's all about people spying. As you know, de Gaulle had his own Free French forces in London and was holding the flag up for France while Germany occupied France. But there were spying going back and forth between de Gaulle's organization and Vichy France. And a lot of the story in that is about this. And I have 2 or 3 spy things going on in Dead in Water.
Cool. I love this.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, obviously these really sad stories from World War II, obviously. I mean, just, gut wrenching, but I think what you're doing by writing these stories is maybe not bringing, because it's crime and crime is not good when you're in the victim of the crime, but you're bringing maybe readers that, uh, let's just face it, history can be really boring in school, right? So when
Yeah.
you start
Yeah.
to read a novel like this, like, ooh, a little bit of crime, you're going to start learning more about what World
No,
War II is
no,
about.
no.
So I think
A
it's an
lot of
education.
a lot of my readers say appreciatively, I didn't know that. It's good to know that. It's good to know this. And I do approach it with a view of trying to introduce information. The danger, I think, is you mustn't overdo it, and you mustn't show off, oh, I know this, this, and this, because I think that's off-putting to the reader. You must insert it quite carefully so that it's all seamlessly part of the plot and the story, and people that will then assimilate the knowledge in the right way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
go
because you remember a story, you know, you don't remember a list of dates.
Yeah.
And one line by each date. Oh, this happened on this date and that happened. You're like, so what? You know, you need the story.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to remember. The story and the characters are really important.
Yeah.
Well, I would never say that I've had so much fun on a World War II conversation, because it's
No,
always,
but
I mean,
I
it's,
just
we enjoy our
never
interviews
thought-
and always learn, but it's always, it's heartbreaking what people went through, but this is, I'm
I
smiling
think
through
people
this
should
one.
know people should know the real history of the war, the good things and the bad things. I think that's
Exactly.
important.
My grandmother, we call her Nana. Nana said it was a hoot. She just said it was a hoot, and she said you could get away with anything you wanted to get if you were quick and you were smart.
Yeah.
Hey, Nana.
I don't think that would be the case for everyone. I think it might have been a hoot for some. The clever ones.
Nana was a naughty Nana, but she wasn't that naughty.
She was a
She's only
go-getter, I think.
she was 4'9", and she says she was the first woman to ride a motorcycle by herself from California to Canada and back.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
so
fantastic.
so she was a little Spitfire.
She was a character, obviously.
Well, she was married
Yes.
at 13. They shipped her over
Yes.
at 13.
Yeah.
You know, it was like those arranged marriages to a man that
Yeah.
was, what, 10, 15 years older than her. Who was supposed to marry her twin sister, and he said no, and then
No,
they
half
shoved,
sister.
or
half
what-
sister. Yeah.
then they just swapped sisters, and off they came to America and started a life. How crazy is that? But
fact,
that was what was going on
have-
back then.
There's a
Apparently
good book.
we
Sorry,
I was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
apparently we have our family on the British side has a castle somewhere in England, and it's supposed to be on the Isle of Man.
Isle of Man,
It's the Holroyd castle, but I haven't
Okay,
found
I
it.
don't know. I'm going to look it up afterwards.
Yeah,
good,
last
because-
time I looked, it turned into an apartment building, so
okay.
flats, I
Oh,
should
bummer.
But it sounds to me like you should write a book about her.
say.
Yeah.
You should actually. Nana rocks.
She was something to reckon with.
But did you find any of that kind of history in that era of young marriages? Where she may have been a little bit sooner, yeah, because she was before that.
Yeah, it hasn't occurred to me that is a line of a plot or anything, but I'm sure there were. More likely in the sort of outlying places. I don't think it would have happened that much in somewhere like London. I may be completely wrong. I'm actually going to look into that now.
Yeah, because I've got to think about when she was an adult during World War II. So that's a little, so that was more World War I time, maybe. I'm going to get.
I know that there was a lot of abuse in the sense that quite young girls, I mean, they were teenagers of age or 16, went on something that they became land girls, and they went to work on farms around the country as their way of contributing to the national effort. And there are stories that they were abused by farmers and farmers' sons and whatever in a bad way. Probably somewhere along the way, one or two of them got married, and maybe they didn't want to get married.
Well, she was 13 and my grandfather was 26 when they got married.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Well, she was the same age as the Queen Mother. That's right. I remember that. She was born in 1900, so same as the Queen Mother, I think. And so she was that same age group. So that was a little bit. So she was an adult when World War II happened. Yeah. So she had a vivid memory of it, I should say. But she's off doing other things up somewhere. She's lighting a fire somewhere. But
she's partying with the Queen Mother and the Queen, maybe.
I know.
Yeah,
really.
it's like, watch out for your wings.
Yeah,
she's gonna snack them.
No, she's gonna spike their teeth. That's what she's gonna do. That's what Nana was about. But Mark, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a true pleasure. So much fun. And everyone, again, the book is out right now called Dead in the Water by Mark Ellis. You can get it on Kindle, you can get it in audio, but a big print run is coming up April 25th. Of course, there's 5 books to check out too. So go to markellisauthor.com. Mark is also involved on Twitter, so you can keep up with him at Mark Ellis and then number 15, because he's going to have to write 15 books. And
That's right.
also he's on Facebook. Look up the Mark Ellis author page, and Instagram, Mark ELL and then the number 1, because he's number 1, that's it. So everyone keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. As I was saying, we do this show every second Wednesday with our friends over at Books Forward. You can see more about what they do for authors at booksforward.com. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Mark.
It's my pleasure. Thank you both, Lisa and Nancy. It's great.